Metro Exodus is our new cover story. This is why I think Game Informer is cool. A lot of reasons, but one of them is, you're sitting in a meeting and suddenly it's like, okay, Metro Exodus looks like it's our next cover here. All right, we're going to Malta to check out 4A Games' new studio and check out Metro Exodus. JV, what was it like to travel to Malta to see this game?
Malta was very strange. And beautiful. We got off there and we were wandering around. When we actually dropped off all of our stuff at the hotel and we're wandering around, I kept going, this looks like Karnaka from Dishonored 2.
Yeah.
And that never stopped. Every single street I turned, I was like, wow, this just feels like sort of that fantasy setting. It's kind of an incredible old city. It's beautiful.
Helped out partly because they also filmed some King's Landing stuff there from Game of Thrones. So it's a weird Karnaka from Dishonored 2, King's Landing, and then they're developing this dark Metro game in the halls.
Yeah, you wonder, we were joking before we went. It was like, is Metro Exodus going to have a nice beach scene or something? Is this going to change their perspective being in this gorgeous city that's in the Mediterranean?
And maybe it did a little bit. I mean, they are finally leaving the Metro, leaving Moscow behind for the third Metro game. Cork, you've played some of these, right?
It's true.
Okay. Metro 2033, Metro Last Light, Metro Exodus. You're leaving Moscow behind, getting on a train, going across Russia, and seeing some new environments along the way.
Through a cracked gas mask, right?
Yeah, you can't really see it too well. There's a lot of rubbing the gas mask to try and rub and see what the hell is actually going on.
The whole game is just
there.
already doing this. You're just wandering around. Occasionally you'll see a tree or a mutant. The whole game.
You'll be happy, Cork. There's less gas masks.
Less and less as you go along. But
there
still
also is some.
Oh, there's a lot. Yeah. And it can still get cracked. And now you can put duct tape over the cracks and it's obstructed.
It is the most redneck solution too. I loved it when they showed us that.
Yeah, it's wild. So, Bertz, what was the demo? What all did we see out there?
So, we saw the E3 demo, which I think wowed a lot of people. You know, Metro's never been given that big stage. And obviously Microsoft didn't have a ton of things going on at E3. So when a demo came out with really amazing kick-ass graphics and, a really nice semi-scripted sequence, people took notice. And, we've all played those games. They're peculiar. I love them, but they are different. Their pacing's different. They're super atmospheric, but there are a lot of those weird authentic touch points, like having to charge up your battery for your light, stuff like that.
They're a little hardcore.
Exactly. They're hardcore.
It feels like a stubborn game in a way that a lot
deliberately and proudfully
and the developers were that way too. When we talked to them,
everyone was stubborn as a mule.
And that demo, that's the one that ends with the giant mutant bear.
Yes.
Okay.
With the crossbow.
If you remember the one. But yeah, they are strict about adhering to reality. They want to make sure that all the guns in Metro Exodus, especially, are somewhat believable. You can actually construct them physically out of pieces, and even just being strict about things where a lot of games would just write it off, where it's like, okay, we have a silencer in the game, but the silence pistol, silencers don't really mute a gun. So they're still going to make a fairly loud noise. It's just going to be diminished a little bit. They're very strict with themselves.
And I kind of love that. There's only a few studios I feel like that I've ever been to where you could feel that everybody was buying into that authenticity thing. Arcane is one. Arcane worries about furniture design for a fictitious city. They are hardcore. Irrational was very much the same when they were still in operation. And you get that sense from 4A Games that the details matter to them.
And it's such an interesting studio. And I wonder how much of it is just kind of always being remote. They're originally in Kiev in the Ukraine, then 65 people, I guess there's still over 80 still in the Ukraine, but I guess 65 people then went to Malta, and so it's kind of a split studio at this point. But I wonder how much that distinct personality of the Metro games comes from just the remote development. It's not like Malta is just crawling with other game developers or Kiev is completely flourishing.
Did they explain at any time during your visit why Malta?
Yeah. Yeah, it goes into a lot of decisions that you see, like when Ubisoft went to Quebec, right? There were incentives in the country that were there. It was close to Kiev. They left obviously because of the unrest that's happening in Ukraine with Putin kind of being right on the doorstep, annexing Crimea, stuff like that. So it's really hard to recruit super awesome talent to come to Kiev when you have a regime that's creeping in on that country, and maybe it's not as safe as you could go work in Poland at CD Projekt Red, or you could go work at Ubisoft in Paris or Montpellier. It helped the recruiting immensely when they moved.
Yeah, they alluded to protests and stuff happening outside of the office, while we were there, their Kiev office when they were still there.
It's a bizarre than story setup for Metro Exodus of like, hey, we're leaving Russia behind, or not Russia, but Moscow specifically, leaving the underground behind, leaving the metro behind, and going out on this great journey. It's an easy analogy to make with like the developers, or part of them at least, going over to Malta. So the story setup for this game, Bertz, that was like a chunk of the demo that we saw was kind of the very beginning of the game. I believe it was the very beginning, opening sections at least.
Right.
And then it jumped to kind of like the first, oh gosh, here's where the terminology gets weird. Open-ish region.
Like sandbox
big hub.
Yeah.
A big hub is probably a fair way of looking at it.
Like the analogy I eventually came up with, because they really pushed hard against the open world sort of thing. It's not an open world game. Was that one level from Half-Life 2 where you're going through like the interstate on the coast and stuff? Like that's what these levels sort of remind me of. It's like
much bigger
still
though.
it's much bigger, but it's still that same sort of design of being very linear.
It's a very
but
wide
open.
hallway.
Yeah, and there are like tactical options and stuff you can explore.
They say, it's like hours and hours of gameplay. And the weird part is just trying to understand how this game is structured is you're on the train going across the continent, and then there's stops along the way where some sections are linear still. Okay. Think of it like a weird beaded necklace where every bead is a different size.
Yeah.
But there's kind of 4 major hub areas that we know of at least, right?
Yeah.
And they kind of correlate with the seasons. It's kind of a Last of Us type thing where you're slowly working throughout the course of a year as you journey to the east.
Yeah, you're going east.
So the first area, you leave Moscow, you leave the snow and stuff behind, and then what they call the spring area, they nicknamed the bridge, because there's a big bridge in that area as well. It's snowy and icy and watery, just a little bit less so.
Like a cliche version of Russia that you would think Russia would look like. Just lots of snow, kind of wasteland stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. What did you guys think of that space?
I was impressed with it visually. Like, we spent
it's gorgeous. Yeah.
so long in Metro and the previous Metro games being underground, which, for sort of dark, dirty places, they still look really good. The Metro games have always looked good, but I was curious how, more open Metro in a different environment would look, and I thought it looked gorgeous. There is definitely a lot of space, though, that I'm kind of concerned about. Like, because bigger games, a lot of their effectiveness to me is how they use their space. It's not enough just to have a bunch of acreage now. Like, I feel like we are past that point. That's dull. So I'm a little concerned about that. Like, I want to see more. Like, what are we going to be doing there? We didn't necessarily see a lot of that during our demo.
And I think that was intentional. I do think they're holding stuff back. We were asking questions about the dark ones and like the supernatural stuff, and they didn't want to give a lot of that, and I think they're saving that stuff.
Right.
But we did get to we did flyovers of these areas, and they are significantly larger than anything Metro's done. They are way more in line with what Stalker did. If you remember Stalker, it was open world, but it was like there was loading in between parts of the open world.
Exactly.
And it feels more, at least the pacing that we kind of got, because we first saw like a jump cut kind of demo where you're going from this area to this area, you're skipping the in between. Then we got a second drive through where they actually started to walk in between, and you got to see how big does that space really feel? It was still big, but it felt a little bit more.
You understand it.
You understand it. You understand like there's always something right over there that you want to go look at. It definitely has that kind of design in mind, where because they're not holding your hands. There's not a guy that's going to give you a quest. There's no fetching. Everything you need to learn from sitting around, listening to conversations, finding notes in the world, or just conversing with a certain person that maybe you saved. They'll give you a tip off to something.
Right. And Anna is on the journey with you, and she'll be over a radio kind of talking to you every once in a while. But it's a little bit like State of Decay, Cork, where you're going up and actually using binoculars to find the areas of interest on your own. Don't think of it like a mini open world where it's got a checklist of stuff to do.
Yeah,
no, there is none of that. You have your same compass and map, and the backside tells you what your immediate objectives are.
Okay.
So it's still got that kind of, you're going to have to look around. You're going to have to find stuff for yourself.
So you're traveling a fair distance, though, from where you've been in past Metro games. Does it seem as though, I'm not familiar with the larger Metro universe. I haven't read any of the books they're based on or anything like that. So does the rest of Russia seems like it's in the same setup?
The world is nuked.
So the world, right. But I mean, in terms of just the way that communities, is it still a bullet-based economy?
No. This is all
the ammo economy is gone.
Okay.
It's been replaced with more of a scavenging, crafting sort of thing.
Okay.
Maybe, like Fallout 4 a little bit, but
and
not
I kind of like that bullet thing. That was
it's
really,
an interesting
awesome.
hook, the idea that you use ammo as currency, but their explanation for it, I'm sure some fans are going to be upset that little aspect is gone. But the explanation is like, well, you're encountering different societies. There's kind of these weird insular societies where people aren't roaming around this nuked wasteland too much. So every region you go to, there might be a new society you encounter, and everyone wouldn't have the exact same form of currency. That was just in the metro within Moscow. So we had to abandon it for something else.
Yeah, and that's another big change I feel like too. Like all the communities from the previous game, like, you know, you were living in the metro, so they were all interconnected somehow. These groups aren't necessarily interconnected.
Okay, so there aren't like established trade routes.
Right, because each area has its own kind of group. And like the first one we ran into were basically like crazy religious people who worshipped a fish in a lake.
And they really believe that technology is the reason that, you know, the nuclear explosion happened and they're in this fallout state. So anybody who walks around with like a flashlight is deemed a heretic.
Oh, good.
And then you come in just guns blazing, lights blasting all over the place.
Well,
and
it's your choice. Yeah. You know, but that's the thing. Like, you remember the previous Metro games had moral consequence that you'd see at the very end of the game.
Yeah.
Because you're working in discrete areas with these factions, you're going to see the payoff of your choices, you know, in those little areas. I think you're going to see them play out more over the course of the game.
And they said that like they're tracking a lot of stuff or some stuff, and then it'll pay off in a different way at the end. And they're not revealing like in a simple Paragon or Renegade, like, hey, you're following this path, you're following this path. It's like they want to keep it under the hood. Yeah. But the game is paying attention to how you're playing.
I think what the creative director said was, you'll get what you'll deserve.
You will get what you deserve. That was the best line of the whole trip. I was like, yes, that is awesome. You know,
so like the world has been nuked. It seems like because they're going on this adventure on by train, right?
Yeah.
Rip the Aurora.
That seems like a weird idea. Like, are the railways fairly intact above ground? Like,
seems that way. I'd imagine it's gonna be a lot of stuff. Like we saw fly-throughs of other areas, which we can get to in a bit. But that first area we just saw, like, oh, the bridge is up or down.
Yeah, it's a lift bridge that's elevated, and you need to go figure out what's going on in that area.
And so I'd imagine it's going to be a lot of the reasons why you're stopping the Aurora along the way. Is like, there's a tree in the tracks. All right, here's a level. You know, I don't know, but I'd imagine that makes an easy structure like that.
Yeah, not, 15 miles of track are ruined, game over.
No, I don't think you'll be harvesting resources to rebuild a track.
It's basically the Wallace and Gromit scene where you're laying down tracks in front of you as you go along.
I can get behind that.
I mean, it's a weird structure for a game, and this is a very dumb, heady question, but, you play a game, just one game.
Yep.
It gets harder, more intense. So it's a weird structure that I can't wrap my mind around with this game where you're leaving the super effed up Moscow. And in theory, as we're seeing, kind of prettier and prettier locations as you move away. Yeah. And so just structuring that game for like, the game has to get harder, so there's scarier, weirder, harder enemies in these prettier and prettier locations as you get away.
Well, I mean, we saw the desert, right? And there was definitely a Mad Max vibe there. Like, they're very conscious of it. They're trying to make it not too Mad Maxy, but there was a giant human head that was built out of sheet metal with like flames bursting out of its eyes. Like you couldn't escape the Mad Max.
That's not a bad direction to go.
No, not at all. But like all the characters in there look like kind of desert savages. And then we saw a really cool forested area that was very complex with like mountainous regions. There were underground cave systems. That was my favorite area I saw. That was like, I could get lost in this area easy. But there were like all those fortresses with like, it looked like cannibal people with like people strung up, like.
It's kind of like Hellblade style, those scarecrows, like those were all over the place. And so that was the E3 area, kind of like the fall area. But we should dwell on this a little bit more. The fact that there's a desert in a Metro game is really bizarre. So that's going to be the summer area. And you were on that Mad Max trip, Cork. It's fascinating to see it, and they are very aware of it, and they're going to try and differentiate it quite a bit from what we saw, maybe even. But there's stuff where it's like they have huge ships, like ocean-going ships that are like crash in the desert, which is a cool look. Also, vehicle sections. You can drive a car around there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that's going to be pretty different. So I'm curious to see how Metro fans react to some pretty big changes they're making along the way.
Well, Prof had that line. He's like, everybody kept asking more freedom, more freedom, more freedom. Here you go, take it. Like they're definitely giving you that, but in a way that still preserves what Metro was.
Right, which is interesting to think of, like how, there's so many games where it's like, okay, this is the open world, go explore. And so what is the value in having, a bunch of different levels, but kind of 4, in theory, large hubs along the way? Like, is that variety, you think, going to come across to players, Cork? Do they appreciate, instead of one large, expansive world, having, the variety of 4 smaller but different worlds?
I think I like that, because then it lets them do things that are like drastic changes from areas without having to worry about how's this desert going to bleed into the snow?
Right,
Like,
right.
someone's going to eventually come across that border, and it might look really weird. So they can kind of do a 4 hours later.
Don't pay attention to this.
Yeah, I think it's like, how do you project a world? Because for me, you know, you made The Last of Us comparison earlier, and I think The Last of Us does a great job of conveying a world state without being an open world. Like, it does a better job of conveying a world state than most open world games do.
Right.
Because it just gets so much across with the variety of settings. Like, even though you are basically, it is a very linear, you know, you're proceeding along, hey, a train track, instead of like just wandering around like these huge spaces.
And also, if you're taking people with you, I think just in terms of a story that has a lot of potential, because it's like a road trip movie or story, there's always people having like shared reflections and experiences. And I think that's where like something like, we'll go back to The Last of Us, shines, because they're able to kind of look back on their journey together. Whereas in previous Metro games, like, you're a guy who's running out and you come back and it's like, this guy's always going to be at the store.
Yeah.
You know, and he can ask how things were, but you guys don't have that conversation about, oh my God, I'm surprised we got past that bear.
Yeah,
Remember that, right?
They're actually doing something cool with that I was really curious about with that train. You know, the Aurora is your constant as you're journeying into the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
It actually is more like a Normandy than I was expecting, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, the way they explained it is that you'll add cars as necessary as you're going on the trip, and you're gathering people. So there's always like, it's your hub city that moves with you. And they said, like, if you ignore side quests, maybe sometimes your hub city gets a little thinned out, you know? Like, I asked if people would get added as you find them. They're like, no, it's actually kind of the opposite.
So you want to do that penicillin side mission.
Yeah. And they even made some reference to the fact that like they kind of have been dialing back on the sim aspects. They were originally much more sim heavy on the train. We're like managing the crew in there, but it's like, that's not really a Metro experience, I guess. But Bertz, I'm curious from your perspective. We talked about it quickly, but you're a fan of Stalker, which is a game from 2007, open world game that a lot of this team worked on back in the day. Were you expecting it to hit more Stalker notes just in the freedom of that open world? Did you think the Stalker comparison is fully apt?
I think it's apt in the sense that the people that created that suffocating atmosphere that you got in an open world experience with Stalker are doing this.
Yeah.
But they're doing it with the lessons learned. They're doing it with like, I mean, Prof described it as their university. They went there. That game was like a 7-year project that was just on fire the whole time, which, to be honest, most games are. You know, as you talk to more and more developers, like, games are on fire right until the end a lot of times. You're landing a plane on fire. But that one was more so because they had never made games like that before, and they didn't have a ton of experience to draw on. The thing that excites me about this game is they did learn those lessons. They've been designing the Metro games a certain way, and this is the blending of the two. Like, what does that mean in the end? I don't think it's going to be like Stalker but Metro. I think it's going to be something different. You know, I really do. Yeah,
and it's confusing, like trying to figure out how linear should they be for certain action sequences. Like Prof, the creative director, was debating like, do we have like, you know, sections where you're on top of the train, like gunning down a gargoyle? Like, I don't know if that really feels like Metro, so I don't know how many of those we want to have. So they want to embrace the open world.
Yeah, they were really frank about that stuff.
Yeah.
They started super open, like Stalker, and they realized like, this doesn't feel like Metro at all. And so they scaled back, and then they reworked their ideas, and they went away from those kind of like, we have a train, let's make it a sim. Let's make you have train fighting sequences. Like, it seems like they're throwing things against a wall and deciding whether it fits the aesthetic. And I'm really appreciative when studios do that. You know, like, they're self-aware of that project as they're making it, and does it feel right?
Yeah, I think you can kind of do like a smaller iteration on a sequel, but by the time that third installment comes out, you've got to do something different.
Yeah, and it's easy to get bogged down. I mean, they are just crazy perfectionist over there, and we have a bunch of video interviews with Prof and some of the other development team that'll be going up throughout the month and stuff. But it's one of those cases where it's like, okay, these guys are clearly brilliant. English is not their first language. Like, I hope the passion and the messaging can come through so people can get some sense of why they're so talented. But it is definitely a case of getting there and whipping out the cameras and realizing like, oh, this might be tricky. Trying to communicate what's fun about the game.
Yeah. And to be fair, they speak way better English than we speak Russian.
I think so. Yeah.
I think they did a good job. You know, like, by the end of it, through like the struggling, you know, translations that we might have had to go through, like, their passion was so evident.
Yeah. It's fun too. There's an art director named Karma, nicknamed Karma, who's very funny and very strange. I think I showed you some footage of him on my computer. That's very funny.
Yes.
We have a video going up live with him later in the month. But he was explaining, I think we're just talking about the tech, like how do you guys make everything look so good? And his explanation was, there are just some people in the office that are very tough to talk to. Like, those are the creative geniuses.
Yeah, and
like,
they make miracles. Yeah.
I mean, so the tech aspect, Microsoft is pushing this game in a big way, saying like, hey, look at it on an Xbox One X. And so what do they say in terms of like actual performance on that thing, Birds?
So for the Xbox One X, they're aiming for a native 4K. And they're still working on the frames per second, but the HDR is going to be there. For the computers, they said they like to burn out graphics cards, and they really hope to preserve that legacy.
That's their thing, is blowing up graphics.
Yeah, we still use Metro Last Light as a benchmark test when we're testing new PCs, because it is like when you push that game to the limits, it's going to push the video cards. Mm-hmm. And they're very aware of their legacy as like an engine company, and they have a lot of really talented programmers. So they're planning to do things, like we saw the demo at E3 and everybody wondered, was that real gameplay footage? As we walked away, Andy tweeted yesterday, he was talking about like, I asked the guys when they came back, did it look like that? And they were like, yes, but with a bullet, like the environments look phenomenal. Mm-hmm. As you saw that gameplay sequence play out with the bear, it seemed like maybe there were just like some strategic animation plays that were happening that made it look really more cinematic than maybe your minute-to-minute look.
Yeah, it's not complete BS, but clearly it was like a super polished slice of that game.
Yeah,
absolutely. But it's still an amazing-looking game. And in terms of performance, like we asked about PS4 Pro, and they said like, unsure still, but similar to others with their explanations. So
that seems to be the standard with PS4 Pro.
Yeah, we'll do something with it in some way. And also, Cork, I'm sorry, but they said they had not really dicked around with the Switch much, so I don't think Metro Exodus will be coming to that.
Okay, follow-up question.
Yeah.
While you're on the disappointing people thing, can you honk the horn in the train?
Great question.
Do you mean do you honk train horns?
Yeah, honk.
I think you shovel coal to honk the horn.
That's not what I'm asking. Okay. Can you blow
the whistle? We didn't see
whistle?
too much on the train. Like we started the open area section in there, but we weren't playing, so we didn't get to dig around too much. But maybe this makes up for it. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's still a work in progress, but like the title screen we saw is like the diegetic, like, train engine area where it's like the different levers and stuff, like the continue options, all that stuff. So maybe.
And Artyom's wife is just off to the side, like constantly sighing. I thought, that was probably my favorite touch. Like, she's just there. She just seems really upset.
All right, what do you think about this, JV? In the beginning of the game, Anna says something like, Artyom, you got to quit looking for other stuff. You just need to make yourself happy in Moscow. We're not going to go find a beautiful forest.
This is a really good reading, by the way.
Yeah, it's spot on. And she's like, we're not going to go live on a beach somewhere. It's not going to happen. You must give up.
Pizza pie.
So the question is, do you think this game will end? And that was a bit of foreshadowing with them finding a wonderful home in a wooded forest, or like just relaxing on a beach saying, I could get used to
totally
this.
think most of the people in that train are going to fucking die. Including Artyom.
Really?
I think they'll kill him.
Really? Why is that?
Because, it's such a sad series.
It is, but if they're going to prettier and prettier places, he'll see like a beautiful...
He will die beautifully. That is my prediction.
I think he ends up alone in Malta.
Alone in Malta?
Yeah.
That would be really cool, wandering around Malta. It is tough. Like, they didn't say this is the last Metro necessarily.
Or at all.
Yeah.
Or at all. The writer, though,
However.
where I'm going with this, the writers said, like, because we Skyped him in and interviewed him for a little bit, too, of the Metro books. And he's like, he sees it as his Metro trilogy. And his ends at 2035. Is that the latest one?
Yeah, the last book that came out was for him. Like, he wants to go do different creative endeavors or explore television. Like, he's interested in expanding.
Mm-hmm. And he was loosely hinting like, things are always moving in the Metro film and TV world. Things are moving along, but who the hell ever knows if anything will ever reach the light of day. Mm-hmm. But it was fun to talk to him and try and get a sense of what that communication's like and how much he's sending in a rough outline. And it seemed like the idea to leave Moscow was coming from 4A. Right? Am I reading this correctly?
Yeah,
Remember this correctly?
that's what he said.
They started with like an open world in Moscow that they were going to do where they connected all the subway tunnels and you're free to kind of move at will through the areas. And the team was just bored. They've been in the tunnels too much.
Yeah.
So then they came up with the idea. I think it was a couple of the art team guys guys and ladies that came up with this idea. Like, what if we do a cross country trip, and they pitch it to Dimitri, and he was super stoked about it. And like he told us this long story about how that means so much to him because he used to have to travel from Moscow into the countryside to visit his grandmother. You know, like he definitely is a passionate man who, you know, he tries to put his own lived experiences into his art. Yeah.
And so he said something like, oh, no, it's 4A Games' idea, but I feel like it's as much mine as it is theirs because I would want to go a similar direction with Metro.
Yep.
And I didn't understand. There's like this, what is it called? The world of Metro? There's like an unofficial expanded lore of fans writing for Metro.
Oh, yeah. There's 80 books. I mean, like it's all over the world. Like there are a lot of people. They don't have a lot of stateside people, but Italian, Brazil, Spain, you know, all those places like they've allowed, I mean, they're novelists. They're not necessarily all fanfic, but like they're published books, but that take place throughout the world in the Metro universe.
Yeah, it's a confusing thing. But hey, all month long, GameInformer.com/MetroExodus. Check it out. If you want to see, you know, how big those areas are, we have a video going up on Friday, tomorrow, if you're listening to this on Thursday. That kind of shows off literally the fly-through that we saw as well. So you can get some rough idea of how big this thing is. JV, you excited for anything coming up throughout the month?
You mean Metro-wise?
Yeah, what's the best feature you're going to write, dude?
God, no, you just threw me off. I thought we were changing topics completely. Like,
nope.
What?
What feature are you most
the weapons. I think Metro has some of the most interesting weapons because it looks like they take that DIY, like, okay, you could build this weapon. You know, like they were telling us at the studio, but that shotgun from the first two games, it's ridiculous. It looks so stupid but amazing at the same time. It looks like someone just like some stupid kid put it together, or a brilliant kid, I guess, put it together in the garage, and it like works.
Yeah,
like it just looks like it's. I really want to. I'm excited for people to see that weapons feature on it.
Yeah, and the shotgun in Last Light alone was so awesome. People really go flying in that game. So
it really gets the power, the idea of the shotgun. You know, that it's just this explosion of death.
Yeah. There we go. Metro Exodus, Jeff Cork.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you so much for watching this excerpt from the Game Informer Show podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version and listen to new episodes airing every Thursday. We cover big games on the horizon, games that we've just reviewed. We have long-form developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So check it out every Thursday.